Hey man,
Man, it's been a long time.
it has been way long. How have you been? Just make sure
Well, that answer is variable. All I can tell you about is right now.
I get that completely.
Yeah, it's just real up and down, and it's challenging. And I realize the connotation when we say the word challenging, but uh, it's not a negative, necessarily a negative connotation. It's more that it's challenging in the sense of circumstances are pushing me to put things into practice so that this doesn't have to be something that um, causes me to be miserable. Um,
Yeah,
and of course, being miserable means being reactive, which means
of
being
course.
hard to be around. And
Yeah,
so, because it's been a real ride. I mean, it looks one way, that's an interpretation. You don't have to interpret it that way. Um, in fact, coming up a lot was something you said in one of our previous talks was that all things are inherently neutral.
yeah,
It's just the mind's interpretation, and I keep reminding myself, all things are inherently neutral. Try to really see into that neutrality.
yeah,
Try to feel the neutrality.
yeah.
Pay attention to um, how much this is something else that's been on my mind a lot too. I've got more than a few journal entries on it that so much of it is the bodily sensation. Something happens, there's a bodily sensation that arises in response, and then the mind goes to work on it. Usually that's how it goes. Sometimes it's the other way around, maybe a thought will come to mind of something, and then, there's a shot of adrenaline.
Yeah.
But mostly it seems like the bodily sensation kind of prevails in most cases. And having to remember to look at that, having to remember to see that. But as all of that's going on, I find out that my 17-year-old daughter has become sexually active,
Yeah.
and there are all sorts of issues there. I mean, yes, I know it's natural. She's been with the same person for, like I think they've been a boyfriend and girlfriend for 8 years or something.
Yeah.
But still, there are some problems there. There are some issues.
Yeah. I mean, where were you at 17 in regards to that whole side of things? Were you listening to the parents of, people who you were interested in?
No, no, not at all. In fact, I would answer it by saying that more than once I've had thoughts about what I put parents through.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
So having that reflection now and realizing that you're in that exact same role now.
right.
You've now seen it from both sides.
Hmm.
Congratulations. But can you infuse this version's experience, the adult experience, with the wisdom of having seen it from the other side? Can you put yourself back in 16, 17-year-old Darrell's position and remember what it felt like to be oppressed by the adults, to be having these rules that seemed draconian and unreasonable and against your desires and urges and all of that, and then use that to change the perspective about not saying that you have to be, oh yeah, free sex household. It doesn't have to be that, but in terms of like the way that you approach both of them and having a different view on the whole situation, can you see that they're working from their own perspective of you are the oppressor in this situation? You see you as the good guy right now, who's like, trying to maintain order and protect everybody and set up the rules that must be followed. And if they don't follow your rules, then they're breaking a rule. They're doing something wrong. You've set up the rules that they feel are arbitrary and unreasonable. You've been in positions in your life where you have seen people with authority as creating rules that were arbitrary and unreasonable.
Yeah.
So, can you have the compassion from recognizing that both of those are are conditioned um, positions. It's not to say that the 16 or 17-year-old view of being oppressed is completely right, but also the view that I make the rules, it's my house, you have to do it. That's also not to say that's completely right. There are pros and cons of each, and both of those are conditioned by all of the experiences that each has had up until that point, and the drives that they have up until that point, and all of the thoughts about what they want at this stage versus what you don't want at this stage, as the adult, right? All of that is taken into play. So can you have that kind of compassionate response to the situation because you can now see, can you kind of what I'm kind of advocating for is taking your learned experience from both of these positions. And like Pernilla uses the term, the fifth floor view or the fifth story view.
Hmm.
It's where you start to realize that just because you hold one position now doesn't mean it's absolutely true and correct and has to be observed by and followed by everybody. So can you see that both of those are just arbitrary positions, the 17-year-old view and the adult view? And can you
Sure.
step up out of it and have that view looking down at both to see that neither of them are inherently right or inherently wrong?
Yeah, I can do that. Now, I say that, and that's true
Yep.
because I'm able to do it with other things, so I can kind of sense it with regard to this. It's just a matter of being willing to set aside or let go of some ideas or views. The thing that's difficult for me with all of this, or I should say, the thing that seems difficult with all of this, is that this relationship is has really got some things about it that well, they concern her last therapist. I haven't had a chance to talk to her current therapist about this, but the fact that he has completely shut down her world and he doesn't want her having friends. He doesn't want her having, and I thought maybe they'd finally gotten over that. And then last week, Tuesday, was invited to some party for a friend of hers that she knows from her old high school, and it's girls only, no boys allowed at all. It's a girls only event, and she told her boyfriend this, and he went ape shit. He
Mhm.
was so angry, and he was trying to talk her out of it, and then that's the kind of stuff he used to do. So it's still there. He
Yeah.
doesn't want her having anyone else. He wants it to be just the two of them.
Yeah.
And that's, I can't really support that.
No, no,
That's
that's
where my
deeply
resistance comes
problematic.
from.
Yeah, I get that completely. That's a whole other thing because that's a difference
Sure.
between painting it that, he's kind of, well, and he might be. This is where it's difficult because I don't know them. I don't know, So it's like, on one hand, it could be a situation where he's manipulating her into doing things that she doesn't want to do, and it sounds like that might be part of his nature. And if so, that's completely problematic. I'm just, if it's something where she is equally as interested as he is in things, then just putting it all on him and saying that, he's arranging all of this ahead of time. That's a very different situation. But I do agree that it's really problematic if he is doing the controlling, quasi-narcissistic kind of behavior of
Right.
trying
Well,
to
I think
isolate her from people and controlling what she does and who she sees and all of that. That is a major red flag that needs to be, um,
Yeah, I agree, and
yeah.
it's funny. That's almost what her old therapist said. But I do believe she is a willing participant. I at least think so. I mean, that's my feeling. So I don't have any problem with spreading the responsibility evenly between the two of them.
Yeah.
And I don't know how much he controls and manipulates, because Tuesday is real quick when it's funny. There are two sides. On one hand, there are certain things that she has no interest in. I mean, she just genuinely thinks they're stupid. He's interested in them, and over time, I'll find she's telling me that now she's interested in these things.
Mhm.
Huh, that's odd. Um, so what's going on there? I don't know. But then at the same time, she's also really quick to set down boundaries. I mean, she to the point of she can be really, I mean, out of line with the way that she speaks to him and responds. So he doesn't have he's not solely the dominant person between the two of them because she's real quick to tear him a new one over things,
Yeah.
and she does frequently.
It sounds like
So,
a perfectly toxic relationship all around. Just
ta-da! And therein lies the rub, as the man said.
yeah, 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 yeah,
So, but there's another part to this, and I mentioned it in one of the emails earlier this week. Is, there are some feelings about all of these things, but at the same time, when Susanna told me what was going on, now if we were wound back 2 years ago,
yeah,
if I'd been told about this, I would have been livid.
yeah.
I would have been so, I mean, I would have been smoldering, red hot smoldering, and I don't know what I would have done. I mean, I wouldn't have gone to violence because uh,
Yeah,
that's that's not what I do. I'm against violence unless it's self-defense or something.
yeah,
But uh, that wasn't the case, and it still isn't the case. I thought, well, maybe it's a shock and I'll get over it. No, it's been a couple of weeks now, and
amazing.
just some part is just understands that this is how it is, and there's really not any sort of it's not personal. It's impersonal. There's not any self-involvement. Um, and really that's as much as I can say. Beyond that, I don't understand why. Because Susanna would even fill me in on other things as time went on after her initially telling me about it. Um, and I haven't had any reactions to any of them. It's been, kind of a, well, I'd rather that's not, I'd rather they didn't, but
Yeah,
okay. So here we are,
amazing,
and
amazing.
I don't, if somebody said to you, well, I really need you to explain to me how that's the case, I wouldn't be able to. And,
Yeah, of course.
I've got some theories, but I
Yep.
couldn't tell you really.
Nope. It's like there are very small shifts of perspective and I really think reconditioning of responses where you had whatever that, smoldering, enraged, burning kind of response was. That was just the go-to response. It's not that that's inherently Darrell or a Darrell response. It's just something which is this whole mind-body organism has been conditioned to do.
Right.
It happens for enough years, then eventually you start to find that there are new ways that you can respond to situations. And those new responses are much more, um, um, what's the word I'm looking for? Uh, Conducive to a better life. It's they're
Yeah.
much more adaptable and the word still isn't coming to mind, but
Flexible.
they're much healthier responses. And so of
Okay.
course you go to that direction. Those are the ones that start to take on because the other ones are just kind of maladaptive for the situation. They just create more suffering and more problems, and you've been down that road for enough years. So we're just redoing the system. And now it's wild how much it can be um, unconscious,
Mhm.
happening while we sleep, happening in the times when we're not practicing. Like all of that is really doing its thing in those other hours. I mean, I had an experience the other day where woke up in the middle of the night and had this just really sharp pain in my side, and it was like out of the blue, didn't know what it was about. And so we have that thing that we did, I think it was the last time we talked, where you feel into the pain and feel into the sensation, and you say, when I feel this pain in my side, the emotion that I feel is. And so I just lied in bed and I did that. And I didn't get like a specific emotion response, but I just kept kind of putting that in. And after a few minutes, I fell asleep. And then I had some dreams that were like, this isn't a necessary part of it, but it does seem to happen most of the time when I do it, that were like very relevant and, to the current emotional situation and the stuff that was going on. And it was like seemed very insightful. And when I woke up, the pain was just completely gone and never came back. So it was like there was something there. And I've had that happen multiple times where something arises, I, do that practice in bed, have a very insightful kind of dream or some phrase or something pops up, and then the thing is just worked through while I'm sleeping. So We don't know how any of this works. Just thankfully, it seems to.
Yeah,
You
indeed.
know,
Well, I I wonder about um, the result of these shifts, um, and how the self structure is um, altered over time, and how that comes into play. Because if the self structure has been affected, if it has been loosened up or some parts of it dissolved, however you want to describe it, then it seems that maybe there are going to be a lot of situations where there's not that there are not certain reactions or um, feelings about something. Um, and sometimes I really wonder what exactly has happened and how much. And I'll start to question, like for instance, last night I was thinking about all of this stuff, and I thought maybe it's just that I'm getting older. And then I thought, no, I remember my dad at this age, he still could have those incredible flashes of anger. And I've known other people who, as they got older, certain behaviors didn't change, and in some cases they actually intensified.
yeah,
No, it's not getting older. And then I have something happen like what happened when we were at her appointment, where we were sitting in the doctor's office and her and the doctor were talking, and there was a mirror on the other side of the room from me, directly in front of me. And I looked up and noticed and kind of stared for a minute. And then I realized, because there was something kind of peculiar about it. And then I realized it's because there's not the typical long-standing thing of looking in the mirror and immediately seeing and feeling that that's me.
yeah,
It was more like it was a window and I was seeing some other guy, and so
interesting.
there was just, it wasn't me. And so I sat there and kind of stared at the mirror for a few minutes and really took that in, because that was really kind of interesting. And
Yeah,
all that to say is it seems to point to the fact that from when we first started this to now, something has definitely changed. And it's not just because I've gotten older or, some sort
yeah,
of more, I guess, I don't know if it's exactly the right word, but more prosaic explanation.
yeah. Love it, love it. It's all very unpredictable, and it's all unquantifiable. It's very hard to quantify exactly what changes by how much, and
Mhm.
we don't know how much it can change. It's like we kind of have expectations a lot of times when we come into this stuff that I'm going
Yeah,
to be a golden Buddha at the end of this, and anywhere, along here is like somewhere on the continuum to glowing golden Buddha. But we don't really know what the outcome is going to be. And even if you get to the point where it feels like you're done, you still don't know how much more change is going to happen because nothing is ever
right,
permanent, nothing is stable. We can't assume that any point along our experience is a stopping point. There is always something that is going to be different because causes and conditions constantly happening. There's
right,
this is just part of one much larger system that's in constant flux. So we can't ever have a place where I have now reached the end point because you haven't stopped interacting with the environment. There is no individual you in there who reaches a stopping point. As long as there's breath and air going in and out of these lungs, and as long as there's energy being exchanged with the environment in some way, there's going to be some sort of development of the personality, of the body, of the reactivity or the responses to stimuli, your experiences of memories, you're making new memories, you're accessing past memories either less or differently than you would have. The older we get, the harder it is to remember certain things from the past. Some things just kind of fade off. But as well as we're doing this work, we're interacting with memories in different ways. You might not be at one point in your life, you might have been going through certain, key moments that reinforce your story about the narrative of Darrell. And that's like they get rehashed and they get, I remember when I was and this happened and that's why I am the way I am and all the things that reinforce my sense of self. I remember, and not just the bad things, but the good things, the things that inflate our sense of well-being and worthiness and all of that. I remember I was so good at this when I was 17 and that was the captain of my football team and blah, blah, blah. And meanwhile, you're in your 50s and you're still like, doing the whole, like, I was the captain of my football team when I was 17 and living on that accolade because, people do that.
Yes, they
The,
do.
so it's like the less we get attached to the reality of those memories, the more we realize that those things are, first of all, not actual true records of a historical event, but rather it's a momentary refabrication of something now. The
Right.
the less that feels like it's talking about this person here who lived that past life that went all the way through there and that I can still be held accountable for things that I did 30 years ago or that I can still be, taking credit for things that I did 30 or 40 years ago. Like it kind of feels absurd. So all of those things, our relationship to those things changes the more we do this work. And that has incalculable effects going forward because we're no longer associating or identifying with so many aspects of our experience. And now we're creating new memories that going forward are going to be the new kind of benchmarks that we're interacting with, though maybe in a very different way than we've interacted with memories from the past. All of that is in constant flux.
Right. Yes.
Um,
Well, that raises a question that I wanted to uh, get your input on because I I really don't know how to look at this, but Susanna mentioned to me the other night that sometimes I can still be a little gruff with Tuesday.
mm,
Um, it's just a very sort of occasional or sporadic thing, but it comes up and it's troubling for her. And it's a question of, okay, that happened. It originated here, but the minute I start to say, I was wrong, I shouldn't have done that, and automatically up come some issues that and I would never say this to Tuesday because she would just look at me like I had three eyes or something. But um, there's no one here to blame.
mm,
You know, it's just causes and conditions. It's just the way things work. But yet at the same time, um, and I understand why we hold people accountable for their acts or actions. And I'm really kind of torn because on one hand, if I step on her toes in some way, um, I want to try to make amends in
yeah.
some fashion. And maybe that's not even going to her. Maybe that's just, continuing to try to um, improve, and continue to do this work in the hopes that eventually that will get undermined because it already has been changed so much. I mean, now we've gone from whatever it was, say, a year or so ago to now it's just occasionally being gruff.
Mhm.
Um, so, maybe it's that rather than saying something to her directly. But still, there's the idea of how do you reconcile accountability for something when there's no one who's done something?
Yeah, it is tough. I like, my favorite metaphor for this sort of thing is comes from Sam Harris, where he talks about, there's no free will, but it's like having an autonomous vehicle, and if that autonomous vehicle starts malfunctioning, you do take it off the road, right? Like
Yeah,
you don't just let it keep going the way it's going and causing accidents,
right.
all that. You intervene. And in the same way, we can still have like laws and rules where we hold people accountable and we remove them off the street if they're, danger to other people or themselves, but we don't do it in a punitive way where we're, punishing them for the fact that they are the way that they are, but we're doing it for the safety with hopefully a rehabilitation stance where we can then help them to correct those behaviors or whatever it is, whatever mental instability that's going on, so that they become more of a safe, functional member of society, and then they're back out, amongst us. You fix the autonomous vehicle, put it back out in the street. So that's kind of a more grand view of it. But I think in terms of like in the personal, the problem is like Daniel Dennett had the thing where he didn't I don't think he really believed in free will, but he said it was dangerous to say that free will doesn't exist because he kind of believed that it would make people act, you know, uh
They would just take
amorally.
carte blanche.
Yeah, exactly, because they just feel like free will doesn't exist. The problem is that that the idea of not having free will is itself, like hearing that is itself one more cause or condition which is creating future behavior. So if you had if you had never heard of free will and the idea that you didn't have free will or any of that, you're going to go about your life having maybe the Christian moral sense that I'm going to get punished for everything that I do. There's going to be some tallying of all of my sins, and so I really have to watch watch my behavior.
Right.
Your behavior now in that case is going to be conditioned by that overarching sense of morality and guilt and shame and fear and all of that stuff that's making you act a certain way. It's not that the it's not that the teaching of hell and sin and all of that stuff is like actively forcing you to behave a certain way, but it's one more condition that's making you choose one path versus another in a different moment, right?
Okay.
So it's like it's not to say that things are predetermined, and it's not to say that there isn't a moment of choice that's happening in any given situation, right? Like I could say in this moment, I have a choice of either taking a drink of coffee or a drink of tea, which are both there. The fact is, when I actually come down to examine that situation, there's no self in there who is making that choice. And one of them is going to be because either, one is warm, the other is cold. Is there a feeling of needing some warmth and soothing in the body, or is there a feeling of being too warm and reaching for the thing that's cooler? Many other different influences might be at play. But the fact that you have the idea that sin and hell and punishment and all of that is a possibility is going to direct you in one direction. Whereas if you had the idea that nothing matters, there's no God, there's no final reckoning, you can just be a complete, narcissist and take, total sociopath. Just take everything that you want for yourself, and as long as you can get away with it, congratulations, you won. You're gonna make very different choices if
Right.
that's your understanding. So in this regard, the kind of danger is having that like, okay, I'm gruff occasionally with her, but it's not me doing it. It's just causes and conditions. That idea of it just being causes and conditions in that way can make it so that you are more likely to continue being gruff because there
Ah,
isn't it's basically like getting permission that it's just the way it is, it's just happening, and people especially in the radical non-duality community kind of take that and run with it, and they go like it's just it's not me, it's just the way things are, it's just happening. It just I get super angry and then it just goes away and it's fine, it's just happening. Yeah, it does, but the having the ability to also recognize in that moment that it's not necessary to be gruff, right? We can also
right.
practices. And so it's like it's mixing up the ultimate level or the ultimate the absolute level of truth where it's like, yes, there is no one there. There's no one who is actually making that choice. It is truly happening because of an unfathomable number of causes and conditions. But if there's a belief here that it is just being caused by causes and conditions, and that being gruff is just a natural outcome, that is going to lead to the future karma of doing that thing over and over and over again.
Right.
So we do want to be careful about that because, yeah, that one time that it happened did happen, and it couldn't have happened any other way because it happened. However, taking that on and learning from it and seeing, okay, you know what, being gruff isn't something that's actually benefiting anybody, that's actually something that could be worked with, that is going to propel you down to making a different choice or having a different reaction in the future, as opposed to just continuing that because we justify it with causes and conditions.
Well, one of the many things that prevents me from being narcissistic or sociopathic is that there is a very strongly felt sense of the way I say it is kind of a shorthand, suffering or not suffering.
Mm,
If it causes any kind of suffering or harm, even if it's perceived, you need to do something else. If it
yeah,
doesn't cause harm or suffering, then maybe you can, maybe you should. That
yeah,
kind of depends. There's some other questions that need to be asked if that's the answer to the first question.
yeah,
But yeah, if it's going to hurt someone or offend them or make them uncomfortable, what have you, then no, that's not what we want to do.
exactly. So when you are finding that you're being gruff with Tuesday, what is happening in the moments before that gruffness appears and during the moment when the gruffness appears?
What is happening? How do you mean?
Yeah. Well, there's clearly a difference, right? If you're not gruff 98% of the time and then you're gruff 2% of the time, something is happening in those 2% of the time cases that are making that gruffness be the the reaction as opposed to patience or understanding. So, what is happening in the external world that might be different in those gruff instances from the other times when you're interacting with her, even when she's, saying stuff that would normally inflame you or, being defiant or however it seems to be. And then also, what are you feeling internally in the moments when you are finding that you're evidencing the gruff
Okay.
response?
Well, first of all, it shows up, I think, almost entirely, could be wrong, but I think almost entirely in the context of having to ask her to do something, um, needing her to do something for one or both of us. And because of the fact that, um, like, it's going to sound kind of weird to say this, it's going to sound like a non sequitur, but today was one of those times where Suzanne and I both notice and comment to each other, wow, she was in a good mood today. She was pleasant to be around and she was easy to talk to because those are so infrequent.
Mm,
Most of the time, she's very reactive, very irritable, sarcastic, problematic, what have you. And so I have to go to her about something, and there automatically there's this um, kind of armoring, kind of going into defense mode because it's a case of, well, this may get a reaction, this may really set her off, and feeling guarded or um, I can't think of the word, but having this sense of, oh no, I've got to ask her or let her know, this, can you do this? This needs, we need help, whatever. And she's not going to like it and she's going to get upset and be really difficult. And so there's that sort of um, um, guarded or armoring or defending sort of sense. And the way it shows up is, there's this kind of this tension and it feels like a resistance, generally in this part of the body. Um, we'll say somewhere between the belly button and about here,
mm,
with
yeah.
most of it typically being right there. And, I asked this question of myself a lot, which was something that you have asked me, which is why does this need to be a problem?
Mm,
And sometimes I can get an answer, sometimes I can't. But in the moment when it's happening and I've got to go to deal with her, looking for a particular kind of result, not wanting to get chewed out, it's hard to. in that moment to try to think about it that way and do anything with it.
So, from what I'm hearing, I just want to make sure I'm hearing that correctly.
Okay.
The When you have that kind of gruff reaction, it's coming from that protective space because you're anticipating, based on what you've seen of her behavior that day, maybe that she's going to be reactive in some way. I mean,
Yeah.
on the surface level, it's also kind of ironic because reacting then in a gruff way, kind of, self-fulfilling prophecy. It's, creating that.
Yeah.
But even if that wasn't the case, um, it's interesting that you are preparing for something which isn't happening, right? You're already reacting to her response, which is just your imagination.
Oh,
She
hold on a
hasn't
minute.
done it yet, right?
I think I
Yeah,
think there may be a slight misunderstanding, not a
sure,
big deal.
sure. That's what I want to
Sake
know.
of
Yeah.
making sure that we're really understanding each other. The gruffness doesn't come up on my end until after she's already
Okay.
chewed me out or reacted to me or
Yeah.
been whatever it is that she has been.
Okay.
That's after that. That's when I begin to react, and the gruffness tends to show up.
Okay. So you have basically you know that, well, you have to ask her to do something. You've
Mhm.
seen her behavior that day, so you have an anticipation of how she's going to respond. You
Right.
ask her to do it, presumably without any sort of loading, though I would be curious to see, we're not necessarily reliable witnesses of our own behavior. So when we come
Yeah.
to the situation already expecting that, she's in a bad mood today, I'm feeling defensive already.
Mhm.
Could be some aspect of where you're already showing more of that than you think you are in that,
Mm. Yeah.
interaction.
I had not thought of that.
So that's something to just be aware of. If you can
Sure.
clock your as much self-awareness as possible in those situations and just see what the real expression is, what's the tone of voice, if you can get a little bit better of a sense of that. Also,
Okay.
be interesting to see, like, having a third party witness. So if it's a situation where, like, Susanna could be kind of watching from the distance and observing you asking to see if her experience of the way that your tone of voice is and your behavior and all of that, if that actually matches what your internal experience of it seems to be.
And that has happened a few times.
Okay. And does she seem to see your responses being the way that you experience them to be?
Not always. Sometimes, probably like um, something like 70% of the time or so. And then there are other times where she'll say, "Yeah, you were a little you were a little harsh or a little gruff or whatever." And usually I express surprise because I
Mhm.
try to pay very close attention, especially in those situations. It's become something that's been kind of habituated or trained to really keep your eyes and ears open in this context because this is where it's going to happen, and I didn't see it happening, and then she'll say no. But then of course I think that a lot of the time she's right, but the tricky thing with Susanna and Tuesday both are they both tend to be kind of oversensitive and have this very uh, I guess overactive sense of when someone's being rude or um, unkind or what have you. Now Susanna is much better at it than Tuesday is, but every now and then that comes up between us when we're talking about these things. Like, well, I think that might actually be on your end. I think you were making too much of it. But a lot of the time, most of the time, I think she's right.
Yeah, and that's always a tricky one because the the person's experience is always true for the person. It doesn't necessarily
Right.
mean that it was your that it was your intention that you meant that, but we always have to acknowledge that the other people experience it that way, and that's to say that it's oversensitive would just be to put that your amount of sensitivity is the correct one, and then they are being, overly sensitive by reading something else into it. So we always have to watch when we're making those kind of judgments where it sort of centers my experience as the more accurate one, and then
Mm,
everybody else is lesser or more based on that. But it is important to also keep in mind that everybody has their own experiences of everything because,
right.
conditioning. So
Yeah.
being mindful of that, being accepting of the fact that they also are going to experience things either, that you are saying things that that you don't feel like you're saying, or meaning things that you don't feel like you're meaning, or it's inevitable when we're dealing with other people because they are seeing everything through their own history of conditioning. And, just the fact of being the way that we are, it makes it so, I have certain preconceived notions about other people, and I'm going to expect them to behave a certain way. And if they don't, then I'm either going to be surprised or I'm going to just continue believing that they're living through that, that they're living up to my narrative about them. And I'm going to put on a story about them behaving the way that I expected them to behave anyway. So hopefully, the more aware we are, the more present we are, the more we've seen through so much of the identification in the stories that we put on, hopefully we can be slightly clearer witnesses of what's going on. But even that is just it's inevitable. We're going to put something on the situation all the time. Like I saw a video recently, and the guy was saying that only 5% of what we see of our visual field comes from the actual light entering the eyes. 95% of
Wow.
what we see is the brain's prediction about what it thinks it's seeing out there.
Man, that's amazing.
That
I mean,
is
I
a
knew
that is
that
a
was
very
going on, but I
small
didn't.
percentage of actual, electrical data coming in through the eye. Everything else is the mind's fabrication.
Well, that just takes that sense of things of walking around in the mind's representation of reality and deepens it significantly. Wow.
Completely.
Huh.
So what she is, what they are seeing of you is 5% of the light being reflected off of Darrell is coming into them, right? The other 95% is their projection about how they think Darrell is behaving in any situation. That tempers a lot the way that we expect other people to see us, right? I think they are seeing me exactly the way I see me. No, 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 no. Not
No,
even close. Not even
and
close.
never.
Never, 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 never. So that's all, part of it. There was something else I was going to get back to. I thought I had a second little road off of that one. Um, I forget where that was going. Sorry, but it's really it it's important to not take for granted that uh, the way that we think we're conveying things is just, it makes sense to us, right? Like I think I'm being super kind and compassionate in the way I say things. Somebody else is going to hear that however they're going to hear it. What's important for you, though, is to have that openness of recognizing where it's truly coming from within you. If it is really coming from a place of openness, kindness, compassion, civility, all of that, and it gets taken out of context, it gets taken in a way that you truly, in your heart of hearts, did not mean it, then can you accept that that was their experience of it? And you know that you didn't do anything wrong in that case because you genuinely just had nothing but love in your heart as you were saying it. If there's any hesitation there, if there is something where it's like, okay, well, maybe I was being a little defensive, maybe I was a little bit reactive in that situation, well, then we can own that too and realize that that little nugget of reactivity might have been experienced in an even more exaggerated sense than it came out based on the other person's conditioning. But still, we have to own the fact that there was still some of that in there. Yeah, okay, maybe I was being a little bit passive aggressive. You know, own that, and then that gives us something to work with. But we have to be able to have that the lack of attachment to how other people receive whatever it is that we say, or but then also be completely honest with ourselves. If yeah, okay, I was being a little bit of a dick, like there was maybe something a little bit underneath that, and then work with that.
Well, and probably the majority of the time I'm pretty open and receptive, even if there's sort of this kind of crestfallen or self kind of berating response of, oh God, it did it again, that kind of thing. I can still accept it. That's one of the things that is a result of having come through AA and having done so much of that work for so long, is that I understood that my not only my own well-being, but almost certainly my own survival was dependent on really being willing to own up to what's on my end.
Mm.
So there's that. I'm generally open to it. Sometimes Susanna will, maybe she catches me on the wrong day, or maybe there's something, it touches into something where there's more of a sense of needing to defend. And so there will be a lot of resistance and maybe some rationalizing, trying to explain it away. But then almost always, it's almost inevitable that sooner or later I'll come back around to it.
Mm.
Um, but what was the first part of that? That oh, can I accept that these reactions are other people's reactions? I'm learning to. It's not that it ever will be complete or all the way, but it's better than it used to be because I've lived through Tuesday for what, 3 years or so, telling her therapist I was abusive, telling her boyfriend's mom and aunt and the rest of his family that I was abusive, and running off this long list of all these awful things I'd done, telling teachers at school and her friends and just this long list of all the things that are so wrong about me, things I do that are awful, and how I'm a terrible person, a terrible parent. And that's one of the great things of those affirmations. And I was open to it when you suggested it, even though there was a small degree of
Mhm.
skepticism.
Mhm.
But even with that part that was open to it, I would have never guessed in a million years that it would turn into these sorts of things. The ability to, I mean, some of it is, beginning to undo the sense of being somebody, not being able to any longer believe that there is some sort of central entity here and that there is some kind of person who is doing things and managing things and going through life, taking action. Undoing that probably helps a lot, I would
Yeah.
think. But also, having begun to reverse that whole self narrative of being the one who's wrong, the one who's the problem, has made it easier to go, okay, well, my kid's an idiot. I'm just gonna let it be. Maybe one day she'll figure it out. Hopefully it's before I leave this dimension.
Well, but which is also an interesting thing, right? So instead of taking it to the my kid's an idiot stage, look at that everything is relative, right?
Hmm.
Your view of Darrell as being a bad person who's always wrong was not true. That was a
Right.
conditioned experience, which is just a thought, right? It's a thought talking about a concept that doesn't exist. It's a thought about a unique individual who does not exist. It's like saying that
Hmm.
Charles Clanahan, who I just made up, is a terrible, reprehensible person, right?
Yeah.
But believing that every day you tell yourself, Charles Clanahan, awful, awful person, terrible. He needs to be just removed from the earth. Terrible, reprehensible, awful, dredge, gone. And then you believe that he really is that bad of a person. But it's an idea that's being reinforced about something which has no inherent existence. There is no Charles Clanahan. He just doesn't exist. There's no Darrell who is being talked about in that way as being
Right.
inherently unworthy and an inherently bad person in every context, in every situation. It's just not true.
Right. Right.
So, so you can have you can have that understanding that that reality isn't true. But you can also see that Tuesday's reality of you is only true to her in the same way that your view of Darrell being a bad person was true to you. It felt real. It was a conditioned experience. It was a conditioned train of thought that felt real. And it seemed to be about somebody who was really real. It
Mm.
feels like it's about me, whatever that seems to be for most of our life. And I take that on that, yeah, I have a thought that I'm terrible and I'm unworthy and I'm always wrong. And I'm going to feel like that is true. Tuesday has a view about you, whether it's based on any reality or partial reality or, certain cherry-picked reality or whatever it is. That view is real to her. It feels real to her.
Right.
So she isn't an idiot for feeling that. She's just as much, living in her version of reality that just happens to not match your version of reality. Even when you were in the I'm bad Darrell who's always terrible, your version of I'm bad Darrell who's always terrible reality wasn't really matching Tuesday's version of, Darrell's a bad parent, always a problem, abusive parent reality. There's still a difference there. You're never seeing the situation completely the same, though there might be some overlap that you are the bad guy in both of these stories, but you're going to see yourself as bad in one way, she's going to see you as bad in a different way. They're two completely different realities that are kind of just showing some similarities that are overlapping. Neither of them are inherently true, but both of them have that kind of quasi relative reality to them. As long as they're believed in, they feel to be true, they're felt to be true, and they have kind of knock-on ramifications going forward. So if you believe for your entire life that you're a terrible person, you're going to behave in certain ways that reinforce that or that have that reflected back at you so that you really continue to feel like that's reinforced. Thankfully, you've been doing the positive affirmations and you've been changing things, and now that idea is going away. That idea has gotten loosened. Now you're having other ideas that this Darrell actually isn't that bad of a guy. He's actually kind of a cool dude. All right, great. So you get these other possible options that are in there, so you can see the lack of reality to that one. It was again an idea about a conceptual character who doesn't even exist. Now you're having more positive ideas about a conceptual character that doesn't even exist. Oh,
Yeah.
okay, Charles Clanahan, not actually that bad. He's kind of cool. So still non-existent, but at least we're in a little bit more pro-social direction where you're going to be having, better interactions with those around you based on that, and it's going to be less suffering on the internal experience. Tuesday still has her view of her reality, which hasn't changed quite so much at this point.
Right.
It's still a conditioned view of this reality. And over time, that will change. But it doesn't mean that there was something wrong with her for believing that one to begin with. And you don't have to take that your new version of the idea about Darrell is the correct one and hers is wrong. No view is inherently correct. So
Right.
your bad Darrell view was not 100% correct. Your good Darrell view is not 100% correct. Her bad Darrell view is not 100% correct. And if at some point she switches and has a good Darrell view, that's not going to be 100% correct either. These are all just sort of partial temporary views of this incredibly complicated system, which is only being seen through these very, very limited filters in a short period of time. I'm taking what I believe is this whole collection of Darrell, right? It's like every interaction that that particular mind-body organism with its collection of cells and neurons and all this stuff, every interaction that that has with other people, with other animals, with food, with inanimate objects, every single little thing is part of that collection that we call Darrell. Over the course of all of the years that those cells have been dying off and becoming reborn and regenerating and reconfiguring in different ways and looking different and sounding different and acting different, we are rather wrongly just labeling all of that with Darrell. That is such a
Hmm.
small limited filter, right? We can't see all that. So what I see is this kind of mental image of what I think Darrell looks like, kind of a mental memory of what I think Darrell sounds like, what I see of certain behavioral traits. He likes band t-shirts. He plays music. He plays like we have these shorthands about a person and their character and the things they like and don't like and do and how they behave and how we expect them to behave. That incredibly limited perspective becomes the person. That becomes Darrell. It's never true. It's never correct. It's not taking in every ray of sunshine that has interacted with those skin cells, every oxygen molecule that has been inhaled and broken apart and converted to something else in the body and then exhaled as carbon dioxide and become some plant in the garden. Like, we're not taking in any of that into account. We're taking this very very thin slice of our conceptual view of something and saying that is the person. That is all there is to them. And it's just woefully incomplete.
Yeah.
So whatever view anybody has is wrong. There is just irrelevant essentially. I mean, on a societal relative level, yeah, it's good to also again have civility and kindness and compassion in our actions with people and that's great. But it's also important to recognize that you are not definable by anything that anybody could think about you. And she is not definable by anything that you could think about her or anybody else could think about her. It's all from an incredibly limited perspective. So keeping these in mind helps us to recognize the non-centralized nature of our own experience or of my own experience that the way that I think I am and the way that I think she is and the way that I think she thinks I am is all correct because that's kind of in the center of my vision. And what I'm saying is none of it is correct. All of it is limited. Your view of you is wrong. Her view of you is wrong. Your view of her is wrong. Her view of her is wrong.
Yeah. I, I, I can't argue against that.
So,
You're
so, but the more you can interact with that and the more you can kind of deepen that, it really just pulls apart all of those bindings that make it so there's a feeling of what if she reacts a certain way? What if she thinks of me a certain way? What if I'm correct in that, I'm really a great bloke and she's one day going to realize that she made a mistake and wasted all these years hating me. And now, any of those narratives that come up, all wrong.
it's funny because I, or maybe not funny, it's sort of ironic that I just scratched the surface of this idea, but have yet to really go all the way with it. And obviously, there's tremendous benefit to be gained by going all the way with it. And I had an experience, I guess it was this last week or the week before, that kind of touches on this. In that Susanna was telling me about something that someone she knows had done, and it was, really not a kind or appropriate thing to do. And so I started reacting to what this person had done. And of course, they do things of more or less in the ballpark of this kind of thing you know, from time to time. It's not an unusual occurrence. And so I started reacting and saying some things about this person. Then I realized, hold on a minute. I'm not actually reacting to the person. I'm reacting to my idea of them, the idea which is largely based upon these sorts of reports I get about them.
Yeah.
And then when I'm actually in the room with them, it's different because I'm the interaction is then based off of who they are there in front of me at that moment rather than and and over the years I've had this sort of experience of getting frustrated or disappointed or whatever with somebody at a distance, when they're not really around, and then I'm around them and it's different. And then I feel like kind of an idiot for or a fool for all the all the things I may have said, even if it's nothing horrible or disparaging, just the fact that it wasn't really accurate or it wasn't complete. It was, disregarding this vast majority of who that person is. And so when that happened, in the last week or so, I realized if I quit reacting to the way I'm thinking about them based on what I'm hearing now, then I don't have to feel like a fool later because I really wasn't fair to them
Yep.
because I was dismissing or disregarding the greater percentage of who that person is.
Yeah. Exactly. This is why in all of the teachings, and especially in Buddhism, there is so much talk about not having mental activity about things when it's not currently happening. It's about
Oh,
being so present in the moment because you can't have a conceptual view of something that isn't in front of you.
hold on a minute, hold on a minute. You can't have a
You,
conceptual
I
something.
think, did I say that correctly?
You said you can't have a conceptual view of something that isn't in front of you.
Yeah, I think that was too many. I think I got my double negatives mixed up there. You, what I mean to say is you can't, you, let me rephrase that.
Okay.
If you are thinking about something which isn't in front of you right now, it is
Mhm.
itself just a conceptualization,
Yes.
right? You can't interact with something that isn't in front of you without it being a concept or a thought about something,
Right.
right?
Yes.
And so it's always going to be in the mind. This,
Mm,
what is directly in front of you, yes, we can argue when we're talking in the later fetters about it still being in the mind. You're still not having a purely raw, direct experience of this actual thing. It is all mind created. But even more so when we're interacting with other people based on those projections that we have that are purely conceptual. And so all of that time when you're like talking about somebody who's not actually in the room with you, you're interacting through those concepts like you so wonderfully discovered. And then when you're with them, it's a completely different experience because now it's no longer the concept, it is whatever. The sad part is that a lot of times, like we talked about earlier, still when you're in that face-to-face mode, you can still have that being colored by your past experiences of thinking about them. Your past concepts about that person can still be coloring it, and you can still be, judging them based on things that you've
yes.
judged them for in the past and expect them to do, and you might not still not have the clearest experience of who they are in that moment. But it is true. The more present we get out of the conceptual mind, the more we can see with clarity how a person actually is. And it's really wonderful practice. I mean, I've had in the past like people that for whatever reason I kind of held a grudge against, or there was, something, and then realizing that you can absolutely let that go and absolutely interact with them and have very, pleasant as though nothing ever happened, wonderful conversations with people if you aren't dragging in your concepts from the past, which oftentimes they have even forgotten about. You have these like grudges that go on for years and the other person doesn't even remember it, but you've been holding on to it. And it's like you find none of that is even relevant to the other person at this point. That hasn't been their lived experience. It's been your lived experience of your relationship. And if you can drop your preconceived or your conceptions of that relationship and how it's supposed to be and how that other person is, you can often meet them in a very refreshing way.
Well, so everything you just said, uh, starting back with the whole thing about Tuesday being an idiot, um, how how do we bring that to the moment each time we're in that moment? In other words, for instance, with Tuesday, I mean, honestly, if I was going to put my money down on a bet, is she going to react and get upset and be difficult or say, any number of things that um, really aren't fair or kind or true? Um, if I had a $20 bill and someone, are you going to for or against, because it's so freaking reliable. It happens. I mean, it's pretty much a daily thing, except for like, when we got what we got this morning, where she was in a great mood, and it was really nice to be around her and be able to talk to her. Um, so how do we bring that idea that you're talking about to the moment so that one, um, we're not interacting with our concepts of the person, and two, like in the case of Tuesday, that I'm not um, already gearing up for a bad experience and possibly am being unpleasant to her before she's even really had a chance to fully react.
Yeah, super good question. There are two things I think I would say. One is practice being surprised. So don't like the mail comes most days, right? You,
Yeah.
it's fairly reliable. It's kind of in their motto. So you don't really get surprised when the mail comes. Maybe they're late one day or they show up early and then you get surprised at when they show up, but you're not really surprised about it because you have this preconceived concept that the mail is going to show up every day. Yep, it was regular. It did. Wonderful. You have that same sort of assumption about Tuesday and everybody else in your life. So instead, can we practice being surprised by the fact that the mail showed up today? Right? You know it's probably going to happen, but can you see what that feels like to be surprised that the mail, oh, huh, look at that. We got mail delivery. That's pretty cool. It's and actually it's a funny thing because I didn't realize this until Pernilla came. Like, um, when I first said, I had mail to go out one day and you put it in the box, she thought I was kidding because I didn't realize in Europe that's not a thing. Like, you don't have like a mailbox that you put mail in and they collect from every day. Like, you have to take it to, find a post box someplace and then you put it in it. And so I had taken for granted the fact that I can just put mail out at the end of the driveway and it just gets,
Yeah.
right? So there are things that we take for granted. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, that's pretty magical then. You can't do that everywhere. That's kind of cool. And so you can start to see it from a different perspective. But what it is it's about coming into each situation with as much like freshness as possible. So it, you have to ask Tuesday about something. Notice immediately what happens. How fast are you having those thoughts clenching up in the body, remembering all the times that she has lashed out at you in the past, all the other times that you've asked her to do something and it's gone, poorly, or that you felt like you've been, abused through it or something like that. Notice if any of those show up the second that you think, oh God, I've got to go ask her to do something.
And what were they again? You said notice
Yeah.
how fast start the thoughts,
The
and then
thoughts and any resultant sensations in the body, any tensing up, contractions, that kind of armoring that you mentioned.
hmm
How fast does that come on when you think about, oh God, I've got to ask her to go do something? Notice that you haven't asked her yet, but you're already reacting as though you
right.
know for sure it's going to be an abusive outcome.
Okay.
Can you drop that? Because it's not really helping, right? Like clenching up your chest isn't actually protecting you when
No,
you just start yelling
it's
at you.
not. It's pretty silly.
It is. It's just it's not helpful. It's not really doing what we think it's doing. Those thoughts that are preparing us for the the possible onslaught doesn't actually protect you in any way. You're just putting yourself in a situation where you're already feeling some sort of stress in the body because you're remembering other times when you felt abused and under strain. So you're experiencing the negativity, the negative states, the problematic states before the interaction has even happened. Then you're going in kind of assuming that that is going to be the outcome of the situation.
Right.
If it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, or if it just becomes a prophecy that came true and it happens, now you've reinforced that. So now the next time you're going to have one more reason to dread asking her to do something again because now I've got one more memory in the bank that reinforces the sense that she's going to be abusive when I ask. Instead, can you hold as much as possible the possibility that it's going to be like today, and she's just going to be like, yeah, okay, I can do that. It's going to be a really light, easy day. You don't know until you ask. Can you have that not knowing in every interaction? And even if it turns out that she says no or makes a big deal out of it or something happens, can you still have that same calm within you as though it had been a yes? Fine, I can do that, right? What what needs to change in you when like that's coming out wrong? What would feel different in you? It's still not quite right. If she said yes versus if she said no, how does that actually change what you feel inside of you?
Uh,
Why
think.
does why does what you feel internally have to change based on whether she says yes or no?
In a general way, leaving aside specifics,
Yeah.
it's wanting or needing something, and it feels like, I don't know how else to say it. I mean, it feels like this is real and legitimate, and need this, or would like help with this, something of that sort, and getting getting that want or need met.
Yeah. I understand, there's a difference obviously between like wanting a Maserati versus wanting help, taking care of Susanna or something like that. Um,
Right.
I get that there's a difference there, but both of them have a similarity in that they are both imaginations of something that you feel would make life better. So right now, I'm struggling to take care of, I got to make dinner, I've got to do this, and I got to do that. And it would be really helpful if somebody else was jumping in and taking one of these tasks. Tuesday's not doing anything. It would be really helpful if she was jumping in to take one of these things. In my mind, life would be easier if I had one last task on my plate right now.
Right.
However, for whatever reason, that is not possible. She says no. She's an autonomous being who can either do things or not do things based on her will, and that's not happening. So that being the case, the stress in you is because of that friction between I have to do these things. My life would be better in the imaginary universe where I had, my daughter was taking care of one of these things and it was one less thing on my plate. Great, I can handle the rest. Versus the reality of, nope, I guess I have to handle them all. And there's a feeling of unfairness there because you're comparing it to the alternate universe when she was helping out. If you didn't have Tuesday in the house at that moment, would you still feel the same way? If it was just you and Susanna and you had to do everything. So there's an
Right.
idea that, and if Susanna was like, handicapped in a way where she was not able to help with those things, would you still feel the same way about her not helping with those things?
Well, this takes us back to something we discussed a long time ago. And I'm wondering, wondering how many people watching these are going, God, haven't we heard this before already? um, sorry. Uh, but you'd said something about, when having to do all the things around the house that I do and having to do this, say clean up after the dogs for the 1 millionth time, quit thinking of it in that way,
Yeah.
quit basing things off of a recollection of something that happened before that's not present now. I think the way you explained it was, imagine like you're the guy in Memento who just doesn't have any memory. You
Yeah.
know, you do something again, but you don't have any recollection at all of ever having done it. So it's like it's the first time. And I
Totally.
took that to heart. And every now and then, I'll kind of get lost in it if I'm tired or, there's been a lot going on for a long period of time. I might get tired and kind of get caught back in that old narrative. But most of the time, it's like, I just don't even, it just doesn't even happen. I've over
Amazing.
time, I've been able to almost completely train that out
Yeah.
so that, okay, I'm doing this now.
Amazing.
There's no other connection to some other, or all of the other previous times. It's just this is what's happening now, and that's it. No, nothing further is added to it.
Yeah.
And yeah, it does make a difference. It makes a huge difference, because there's that much less self-created stress
Yep.
that accumulates over the course of the day because of having to do all these things that you've done so many times before. And really, what it comes down to in the final analysis is it's really just a matter of how you think about it.
Completely.
If I'm not
Completely.
thinking about it that way, it's not a big deal. Consequently, no stress.
Exactly. It is all mind created. All of our
Hmm.
suffering is mind created.
Yep.
The problem is we have a habit for decades of successfully creating stress and suffering. And we don't, for most of us who have never done any of this work, we don't realize that it's an option to not do that. Like we're kind of the privileged few that actually recognize that it's actually not necessary to keep doing the same things that we've been doing over and over and over again. There are other ways to be able to interact with the world and realize that just because I'm thinking it, it doesn't mean it's true or real or has to be this way. That my projections of the world being a certain way, just my projections. And that is incredibly powerful when we really put it into practice.
So when it comes to these sorts of things of remembering and being aware of the fact that we're telling ourselves stories that create this discomfort and stress and so forth, how do we get that so that it really is internalized
Mm.
so that we cease doing those things? I mean, I've got it with one area of my life,
Yeah.
but there are all these other places where either it doesn't come up very often or sometimes it doesn't come up at all.
Yeah.
Um, so how do we get this to the point of it's something we carry into all of our affairs?
It's really that, at least, maybe you hear people say that there are like, the fast path of where some people have just an explosive aha, and then it just kind of changes everything all the time. I've never met anybody that has really had that. So I think in general, we're talking about the slow path here, which is
Mhm.
really being mindful and present at least some of the time in every kind of situation that we're in. And these things do generalize out. The more you become aware of, say, for instance, the belief in the, always being the bad guy or the scapegoat, something like that. That was infiltrating not just one particular interaction in your life. That is
All
underpinning
of them.
everything that you do, all of your interactions, all of your beliefs about yourself, whether you
Yep.
go and work on an amplifier or just sit and doom scroll or whatever it is, like all of that is being pinned on some belief about yourself and self-worth and what you should be doing in the future and blah blah blah. Everything comes down to some of these core beliefs that we have. And things like really deeply recognizing that everything is your projection, that none of it has an inherent truth, that none of it has an inherent reality, that what I take to be myself is not an inherently real, stable thing, and that anything that gets thought is even less real and stable and consistent than that. It is just imagination. When that really gets seen and really starts to change some of your experiences here, of course, it's going to start to just show up in every situation that you're in because you
Okay.
you might get caught back into old selfing spirals in a certain situation. But then if you can have a moment of self-awareness in that, when you find that you're getting caught up in selfing in some sort, there's some identification happening. That's when it's like, a little alarm bell goes off. Like, hold on, gotta look at what's going on in this moment, and then recognize what's happening in the body, what's happening in the mind. Are there some of these old stories that are running? Is there some old belief that's being triggered? What is happening here that's actually making that selfing cycle turn on in a way where I'm believing it again, or it's being believed in again, whereas it wasn't before? And then you might find there's something in that particular situation or that particular context that is maybe triggering something that you either haven't recognized in the past that still needs to be seen, like, oh, maybe there was another belief under there that was underpinning all this, or maybe it's a condition thing, like uh uh like people who, you smoke cigarettes for a long time and then they quit. A lot of times there will be something where like, well, the only time I crave a cigarette is after dinner. I used to always have an after dinner. So there's still like a contextual thing where there's still a little bit of craving that pops in at a certain time. It's only when I'm in this kind of situation that pops up. Just like how we have contextual learning where it's like, it's good to study something where you're going to be doing the test or in the same kind of environment. Like you don't, if you don't listen to music while you're studying because you're not going to be listening to music while you do the test or something like that. So there's like something that's consistent and the brain kind of draws that connection in. There can be that same sort of thing where it's like every time I've been in this particular work situation, for instance, I react in a certain way. Okay, so there's something environmental there that every time you're in there, you get put into this kind of conditioned experience based on the environment that leads to this way of being. So now you just need more attention, more presence and mindfulness in that work environment to start changing and bringing the clarity that you have in your living room to the work environment, that sort of thing. That makes sense.
It does. It does make sense. I just have to laugh because I had something like that happen last night. I was getting ready to go to bed and pulled back the sheets and found that one of the dogs had thrown up.
Oh no. Oh
And
God.
I mean, I'm getting ready to go to bed. I mean,
Yeah,
they were
yeah.
shutting everything down. And so I'm not going to, deal with laundry and all of this.
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
clean it up and treat it and then put a rag over it.
Oh
And
God.
then some of it had gotten in the top sheet too. So I cleaned that
Yeah.
up, but it was wet. So I left it folded over so that it could dry out. And later in the
Yeah.
night, I'd wake up and I could just, it'd be dry.
Yeah.
Well, later comes and I feel something wet, and it turns out the dog has thrown up again in a different spot. So here I am doing it again and leaving that part of the sheet folded over so it will dry out. And as I'm cleaning it up, I go to the bathroom to put something in the trash. And as I'm walking into the bathroom, I feel something wet and squishy underneath my right foot. It
Oh
turns out one of the
God.
dogs sleeps on the floor in a bed, and he'd thrown up right there. So I'm
What are
cleaning
you
it. And
feeding
then
those dogs?
they eat stuff in the backyard they really don't need to be eating.
I'm sure.
And so yeah,
Oh,
that's an issue. But I've never had it happen like that before.
no, that is
And,
insane.
and then there were smaller versions of that because of things that the room is mostly dark, and so
Yeah.
things get dropped and what have you. And so I keep running into stuff. What the heck? What's going on here? And at first I start to feel frustrated. And
Yeah.
then for the life of me, I guess it's just this, the brain does these things. We think about this stuff, we work on it, we integrate it into our lives. And so, the brain will just kind of flip into that mode. And all of a sudden, I think this might be what you have said, Pernilla calls the fifth story view, because
Yeah.
there was sort of this larger view. It kind of stepped back from it
Yeah.
and seeing it, like as if I was seeing this as an outsider. And immediately it became very obvious that if I turned this into a scene in a comedy, the
Yeah.
French would find this hilarious.
Completely.
And I could see
Completely.
Jerry Lewis doing this.
Exactly. I have often seen myself as a character in a sitcom where like I laugh at that's been thankfully for years kind of the go-to response is like if I hit my thumb with a hammer or something, I laugh first because it's like I'm seeing it from the outside. The absurdity of the situation is the first response. And so I do tend most often to just laugh when calamities like that happen because it's like from a different perspective, if somebody else was watching it, it would be absolutely hilarious. So why would
Yeah.
it be absolutely hilarious here? Like it's just a matter of perspective. And it's
Well,
not taken personally.
maybe that means that's something I get to look forward to in the future, because it's
Yeah.
really just highly coincidental that you said that, because it was only in the last 5 days or so. I cannot remember what the situation was, but there was something that came up, and I thought, gosh, wouldn't it be great if I just laughed every time this happened instead of feeling troubled by it?
Yeah, 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 completely. Notice when you do and you do feel troubled by it, is there the feeling of identification? Like I remember back in the day, it was almost like everything was conspiring against me. Stuff would fall out of the freezer and it would be like a tumbling thing. And it's like, oh, you're doing this against me. It's kind of the idea. Like it's like gravity is like, willfully conspiring with the stuff in the freezer to just fall, start tumbling out in a cascade just to piss me off and ruin my day. It's like it might not be that explicit, but there's that undertone underneath it that like you're doing this to spite me and somehow. So can you like notice if there's any feeling of like I'm the one being inconvenienced, I'm the one being troubled by this in some way, I'm the one who has to deal with this. Any of that finger pointing back to the one who is enduring a situation of that's unfair or you know stacked against me.
Well, yeah, I mean, I can't see it as clearly as I would if I was actually in the moment. I mean,
Yeah.
I understand that, but yeah, I mean, like looking back at that situation last night, that was where it first started to go, and then for some reason it snapped and became something else. Um, Even though that feeling in the body was still there, so I can kind of recall that, and yeah, there was that sense of um, being the one that this was happening to.
Yeah, so that's a good thing to notice when it's happening. If you can
Okay.
notice it and feel what it feels like to have that moment of identification.
Hmm.
What does it feel like to be the one who these inanimate objects are conspiring against you that's making this thing happen to me in this moment?
Okay.
And then
Well,
putting the attention on it, is it true? Can you just
hmm.
dissolve that feeling by being so present in whatever it is that you recognize that this is just, oh yeah, right. It's just this, hilarious
Yeah.
things going
Well,
wrong.
I mean, that's so similar to some of the things that I already do to varying degrees, depending on the day, um, that have become more or less habitual. Um, so that seems like that will be something that the mind will be able to very easily um, get a hold of and put into place. I wanted to ask you about something else, but before I get to that, when we started that whole conversation
Yeah,
regarding, interacting with our concepts rather than the,
yeah,
person in front of us or what have you,
yeah.
uh, you'd said there were two things, and I don't know if you
Hey,
ever got the second thing or not.
I did not. I'm really glad that you brought that up. I was actually waiting for the appropriate time to.
Yeah, well, I had it numbered. I had one, and then wrote that down and some notes about it, and then I had number two, and it's just so it's kind of
That's
hard to miss.
awesome. Thank you for that. Good segue. So the other thing is um, similar, I think, in nature to what we were talking about, but it's when you are in the actual situation, say with Tuesday, um,
Mhm.
there's the first part of it is the recognizing those preemptive sort of um, the thoughts and the feelings and the emotions and stuff that we talked about that I'm worried about. But then it's when you're actually in it and to notice the part of you that would become gruff or reactive. What I was thinking is there's a, a Zen koan that was something like, and I'm kind of paraphrasing here, that the the student asks the teacher, where do you find the place that has neither hot summers or cold winters? Or, so effectively, like, where do you find the place where you don't have to suffer one extreme or the other? And the answer is during the summer, sorry, during the winter you freeze, and during the summer you swelter. So the place where you are not getting too hot or getting too cold is by going so completely into the experience of it that the concept about it dissolves, that the
Mhm.
attachment to or aversion to it dissolves. So if it is 110 degrees and you are absolutely sweltering, the resistance to that is what causes the suffering. So you go fully into the experience of being hot to the point where the concept of hot or sweltering loses its meaning. And it's just raw sensory experience with no need for it to be otherwise. And if you're freezing cold and it's, you know, you're shivering and all of that, can you go so fully into the raw experience of being cold and shivering that the attachment or the to it needing to be otherwise or the aversion to it goes away and you are just fully embroiled in the situation. So in this context, that is really experiencing what it feels like to have her yelling at you or saying no or whatever that does in the body and whatever that does in the mind. Can you be so fully invested in the experience of what it feels like in that situation that it's no longer a problem that it's happening? Because it's not. It just simply is the way that it is. And it's not to say that, we should put ourselves in situations where we're being abused or any of that. But there's also the acknowledgement that in certain situations, we are going to be uncomfortable in some way, right? There's going to be something that we would choose otherwise not to do. So rather than basking in the uncomfortable nature of it and the fact that I would rather it not be happening, can you be so fully integrated into the experience of what is happening that it's no longer a problem that it is?
Mhm. So I think I know what that means, but let's go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and assume that I don't, at least not completely. That maybe I have a general idea, but there's
Right.
something there that um, it would be better to make it clear. So, what does that mean to go so fully into an experience that um, the concepts disappear and it ceases to be an issue?
Do you have an itch in your body anywhere right now?
Yeah,
Perfect. So feel that itch. Now, when you first start to notice it, you probably notice it from a distance, right? Like where is the itch located?
right there on the eyebrow.
Oh, convenient. So do you feel like it is in one location, sort of on the body that's kind of separate from where it's being viewed from? This one's maybe a little bit tricky because we often feel like we were viewing from right behind the eyebrow, so it might be a little close.
Oh, I think I see what you're saying. Because no, it's not like that. It's not right behind the eyebrow. It's sort of eyebrow and then here.
Okay. So can you feel Can you feel the itch, however it's showing up for you? And notice if you initially have a feeling that it's wrong that it's there. And it might be really overt, or it might just be something as simple as having the vague urge to reach up and scratch it, or something about, a feeling in the body that's like, this really shouldn't be here. It would be much better if it was gone. Something like that. Again, might be very strong
Yeah.
or be super, super weak. And now I want you to just put all of your attention in the sensation of the itch. So you're effectively ignoring that urge to scratch, and not in a masochistic way, but in a curious way. What does it actually feel like to have an itch when you don't name it as an itch and instead just let it be a neutral sensation? And then take whatever it is that feels like our attention, however that kind of appears for you, and have it zoom in to the sensation itself. So get is finely ingrained into it. Like it's the little sensation of itch in front of the eyebrows is like might start out as feeling like a tiny little feathery tickle. And then what we want is to get closer and closer to it so that you just feel it, might feel like it's like expanding or diffusing, getting more soft and open to where the nature of that experience changes. Did you get a feel for that?
Yeah, because it's almost completely um it's boy, I don't know how to describe this. It
Mhm.
it feels like it's spread to the point that it kind of
Yeah,
diffused.
exactly. Exactly. And it's that same process. And you can do this with any itch anywhere in the body. And you can do this with like chronic pain and stuff too. It's remarkably
Mm.
potent in that regard. But you can use the same technique on those moments of you're being yelled at or berated or something where you feel like this contraction in the body that feels very, I'm under attack by her, or, I don't want to do this because. And you can use the same just absorbing of attention into the physicality of that moment. Whatever it feels like either has a contraction or a feeling of pushing away or discomfort, abrasive, uncomfortable, whatever in the belly or wherever it shows up, you just fully absorb into that in a way that you can see that it's not a real thing. It doesn't have a meaning of its own. It doesn't mean that you are actually under attack. It doesn't mean that this is a terrible situation that you can't bear and you can't handle. It doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you or that she's right and you're wrong or that you're right and she's wrong. None of that. It's all mental activity. So, can you fully absorb into the physical experience of whatever is here? And I find itches are a really good way to practice this because we generally always have some. And they're not as excruciating as some types of pain can be, where it's like really don't want to go there, but they're just uncomfortable enough that we tend to want to get rid of them. And then we find quite remarkably that when we just sit and absorb into them and experience them, they're never a problem anyway. They just kind of like diffuse on their own, and oh yeah, okay, guess I didn't actually have to do anything about that. We can start to then take that into the emotional sensations, into again, chronic pain, things like that, and situations where you're feeling um, triggered in some way that either you're feeling guilty or shameful or fearful or wrong in some way or something, and not good enough, something where you have like a physical reaction to it. And it's a way of noticing that, okay, the thoughts are there, but it's a concept. Okay, but the physical sensations are making that concept feel more real and potent and about me. Okay, so then we completely absorb into those sensations to the point where th- that that link that joined the thought with the sensation dissolves because the sensations effectively dissolve. They lose their meaning, they lose their assumptions and the concepts that have been overlaid upon them, and then the whole thing just falls apart. And then you start to have instantly that kind of fifth floor view where you recognize that none of what I thought about the situation was actually true.
Hmm.
And that's why in the Zen koan, it's really in whatever situation you're in that you find yourself so uncomfortable in, can you fully go into that feeling that is uncomfortable until it just becomes neutral and there's no need for it to change?
Yeah, this is going to take some work. It's doable, and I've actually done it to some extent before at various times. But it's also something that I'm not um, too terribly skilled at yet. So it's something I just need to be doing more of in order to really get a handle on it.
Yeah, it can take practice, but it's incredibly powerful because everything that we everything that we rebel against experiencing in the moment is our perception of that thing. It's not the real experience of it.
We're not rebelling against the actual thing. It's just our concepts of it, kind of like you said earlier.
Exactly. Exactly. Even when you have like a physical injury or something, we're rebelling against the thoughts about the injury and the ramifications of the injury and all of the self-generative views about it. It's not about the actual sensation itself. That might, hurt initially, but we can go into that and we can experience that differently. Again, still seek medical care, obviously, but you don't know who's watching this, what they're gonna,
Oh
take.
yeah.
But it's important that, we always seek medical care, but it's also important that we don't have to live through that perception of, oh no, I have, a cut on my foot or I broke my leg or I did whatever, and now I'm going to live out of the agony of my thoughts about it, as opposed to just can you be with the raw sensation of it until that changes and you start to see not what you thought was there, but what is actually there when you're not putting on all of the thought stories.
Well, and that's that you said thought stories is perfect timing because I want to ask you something. I have a pretty good idea. I know what you're liable to say, but I don't want to leave any doubt.
Yeah.
Um, when it comes to these narratives and the fact that some of them have more gravitational pull than others, with dealing with Tuesday, one of the things that tends to snare me is um, I'll ask her to take care of something. She'll be really nasty back, and um, just in a moment, just in a moment, um, there's this sense of um, um, the fact that virtually everything is on me, which now includes making sure that Susanna has what she needs and she's okay, and uh, that she spends an inordinate amount of time on the couch watching YouTube videos, drawing, uh, using her phone, whatever. I mean, she spends a tremendous amount of time on the couch, which is fine. That's not inherently a bad thing. But so I mention that because if I ask for help with something, or there's something that's, we've given her certain things that are her responsibility and we need her to take care of it, and then she resists and gets upset and starts giving reasons why she shouldn't, or she a lot of times will feign illness or some kind of not feeling well to get out of things. And so there's this feeling that comes up in response to that of, she's, she doesn't have to do much and she spends a lot of time just doing what she wants. Now that especially now that she's not in school and she's, supposed to be working and getting her GED and, just tons of free time. And, we make sure she has everything she needs. We do lots of things for her. Seems like, you know, why can't we just get cooperation on something that's a legitimate need, instead of all of this arm wrestling and difficulty. So I'm going to guess that this comes back to the old idea of just the narrative.
Yeah, you have the idea of this optimal, fair relationship where you have an idea that you are providing things, she should then be living up to her sort of unspoken half of the bargain, and she's not fulfilling it. It's like an unofficial contract that we are providing these things for you. You should be doing something in return. You're not. I'm being cheated, or we're being cheated by you just taking advantage and loafing around on the couch doing what you want to do. And I understand that there is, a very real need for help in these situations. The reality, unfortunately, is that we don't always have the perfect, person to step up in that situation, and that she clearly doesn't see the contract the way that you see the contract.
Right.
Being that she's still a minor who is, under your supervision and care, you know, you're kind of obligated to provide those things to her. And she's not in any way obligated to reciprocate.
Right.
When we hope that as people get older, especially, again, when you're in your teens, it's generally a very self-involved time anyway. I mean, it's frontal lobe development still not there yet. There are lots of things that are, it's a strange time for a human, but we hope that as people get older, that they will start to kind of start manifesting some of those social behaviors that it's also, I don't know, because she's autistic. I also wonder if it would be helpful. Like, have you ever kind of spelled out this unspoken agreement that you have? Not that,
Yes,
okay.
we've talked about it in a number of different ways, many times over the last however many years, at least 3 to 5 years.
And how does she see her role in this family?
That's hard to say with certainty because she never really comes out and says it. But based on little things she said here and there, in conjunction with her actions, the sense that Suzanne and I both get is that she feels like she should be free to do whatever she wants, without any mitigation or impeding on our part, just complete and total absolute freedom to do what she wants the way she wants when she wants it without any interference from us. And that she shouldn't have to do anything she doesn't want to
Yeah, it does sound like every teenager ever. Um, um, it's a fine line, but both in the terms of parenting and trying to instill some values, but also recognizing that in some cases you can do all you can, and it's just not going to make the difference that you hope it's going to make. And then for
do.
our purposes with what we're talking about, it's really about being able to mitigate that effect on you and your reactivity to having it not go the way that you expect it to be.
Yeah, well, and that is it. That is obviously, at least from my point of view, the single most important and critical part of the whole equation.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, I love your shirt, by the way. It's very apropos for our talk today.
Oh, I didn't. I figured it. Knowing the way you said, I thought it was. I thought that's all that was being seen.
It
So,
was when you reached up to do your eye drops,
oh,
you see that
I see
nothing
the
was
rest
there.
of it.
Yeah. Um,
That is apropos.
it is. It is. Um, yeah. The yeah. The dynamics are obviously going to change as time goes on with her. This is
Right.
the one, 17-year-old snapshot of, in this moment of how she is in this thing. It's unfortunate that even, with whatever grudges she has against you, whatever she thinks about you, it's unfortunate that she's not stepping up to help her mom out, but this, for whatever reason, is the way that she is at this moment. So
Right.
you can obviously do all of the good parenting things and, try to instill all the good values, but it's not guaranteed that any of that is actually going to work.
Especially not in this age of social media.
It's really not. We are in a troubling time. And
Hmm.
we just watched, I mean, it's completely on a different tangent, but we just watched a 2.5 hour debate last night about AI and the
Uh,
like near future ramifications in the next couple of years of that on the job world and on
mhm.
what education should look like going forward because of the society that's effectively being created by the rapid expansion of AI and effectively they're saying like the biggest thing that we can teach children nowadays
Mhm.
is general adaptability that basically the time like what we learned like you learn certain skills, you then have a career that is your kind of lifelong career, and then you either pass that down to your children or they learn skills that they find their career and then they go on. That's gone. The people who are on the panel were saying that they're teaching their kids who are anywhere from like 3 to 19 is you basically have to learn that general adaptability to be able to think on your feet and to change and to be creative in any given situation so that you're always flexible and able to um, uh, pivot at any point because there's basically no certainty or security to be had in the future in this regard. It was a very very fascinating and rather terrifying talk in a lot of ways. It's funny because all of it is I'm fascinated by AI. I'm fascinated by all of the technological revolutions and things that might be happening. I think, every generation in history, I think, has thought that it was living during a unique period of history, but I think it might actually be the correct ones. Like this
Yeah.
might really be like what they were saying in the debate is basically AI is as revolutionary to society now as the advent of writing was. But
Mm,
the difference is that the advent of writing, it took thousands of years to really slow. Most people still couldn't write or read, so it took thousands of years for it to really become a major societal change. This is happening in, months and years. Like it's happening at such an accelerated rate in such a pervasive all jobs, are being affected. It's like a universally exploding thing, which we have absolutely no idea how it's going to shape society going forward. So we're in a very unique, very interesting period with no guardrails.
well, I mean, it's just one person's perspective. It doesn't really mean anything. But if I were going to say anything to someone about this, it would be that um, don't don't or be very wary of getting um, advice or input on how to live your life, and in this case, particularly specifically, um, trying to walk this path in your life from something that has not actually done it itself.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's really solid advice.
Because there's just no substitute for that.
Yeah.
I mean, you cannot, no matter how you try, you cannot instill in AI or any sort of digital technology um, what you and all the rest of us have gotten from treading the path.
Yeah,
There's just, you cannot replace that or substitute for it.
it's true. It's true. I do. I feel in me, there's this push with all of this going to the AI and all of that. I feel this like push to like Pernilla and I to just go off to a little island someplace and have a little, like just kind of going the exact opposite direction and just have like a little, a little hut and have people come visit. Just go very, 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 very off the grid, very, very analog, and just keep
I can
back to the
see why
basics.
you would.
It's funny because none of the people on the panel were, like the AI doomers, but
Hmm.
there was a lot of very general pessimism in terms of even one of the guys on the debate. He owns an AI company, so he's kind of the pro, the most pro of the three guys who were talking, and
Hmm.
even he says, yeah, it's going to put vast sections of the world out of work, basically. And they showed like a graph of the projection of which types of jobs are going to be eradicated and by what percentage in the coming years. And he's, very adamant about saying it is going to be in a couple of years and it is going to be, um, you know, radically changing of the world. But he tends to paint it in a bit rosier fashion, which also sounds, the way he does it has a bit of uh, feels a little bit insincere. I think, it has one of those like tech guys talking about, how great things are going to be when everybody is a millionaire making their own apps because everybody can do that. And AI is going to do it for them. So everybody's just going to be a tech billionaire. Solved. It's like that kind of level of delusion that is very short-sighted, very self-serving, and it's so, we were finding it really fascinating listening to it because it's that sort of thing where what it, it's like a magnified version of what we were talking about earlier, where everything is coming from this kind of self-projection. Like 5%
Hmm.
of what comes in is what's actually out there in some, you know, form of light wavelengths or something. The rest of it is the projection of the mind. And you can hear when somebody like that talks that the only thing they have experience with is their own experience. And there is so little ability to empathize or to visualize something outside of their experience that
Yeah.
it just, they're either willfully being disingenuous or just completely locked in the self-delusion that my view of reality is real and it's the way that it really is and everybody shares my experience of reality.
And,
So it really, really interesting to see examples like that because they take what all of us have in some form and make
mhm.
it very, very visible.
Wow, that's really interesting. That's
Yeah,
really interesting. And I that's going to be at play in anything, and that explains why so frequently, I mean, almost always, it's very rare that anyone actually hits the mark right on the head. Usually when it comes to these sorts of things, we're wildly off
yeah.
base.
It's a very interesting time to be alive, for better or worse. But it
For
does
better
give
or
us a lot
worse.
of does give us a lot of opportunities to work with this stuff, which is great.
Yes, it does. Well, the funny thing is so far, with the exception of the occasional piece of news about things political,
Yeah,
by and large, I mean, most of the time, I feel kind of like George Carlin said near the end of his life. He said that, he just was divorced from it all.
yeah, yeah.
And I'm sure maybe I would feel differently if it comes to roost on our front porch, but maybe not. I don't know. All I know is right now I just feel divorced from it all. And so I
Wow,
have very little anxiety about all of this.
that's amazing. It's good. It is one of those things where it's a hard thing to negotiate the balance of in terms of like social responsibility and then also personal just like masochistic torment that we put ourselves through by doom scrolling and watching stuff and getting stressed about things which are not actually in front of us at the moment, but also, not becoming completely just like sociopaths and numb to, other people suffering because I'm just not personally seeing it. So it's like it's a real tightrope that we're walking with these things. There was a talk which I regret or a meeting that I regret we didn't get to make the ASI. Was it the Association for Spiritual Integrity? I think something like that. They were
Oh
doing
yeah.
talk of spiritual teachers who were getting together to discuss basically social activism and the the different views on it within the spiritual world of whether we should be completely above it and completely not engaged or deeply in the root of it and deeply engaged and everything in between. Um, I keep forgetting. I want to see if they recorded it because I was curious what the overall consensus was or if there was even a consensus.
Yeah.
Because I think we're all finding our own, whatever feels right to us, again, based on our own conditioning of did we come from roots of being politically active and um, protesting and doing all of that, or did we come from roots of being kind of disconnected to begin with? Was it something where, you know, are you using spirituality to bypass
Yeah.
actuality in the world? It's very tricky because it can absolutely become a way of us just divorcing ourselves from the real troubles that are around us because I can kind of numb myself to it or dissociate or just convince myself that I don't see any of it, none of it's real, it's not happening, everything is the way it's supposed to be, perfect, 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 God in the universe, la la la. I, you know, there are ways to experience things where that all seems true. But there's also the kind of relative reality where these things also are happening. And it's finding, I think, for each of us how much it feels natural to get engaged and not.
Well, let me ask you this before we run too long,
Yeah.
because this is something that has been coming up over and over again for several weeks. When it comes to the business of Fetters 4 and 5, and how do I sum this up simply? The idea or the concept of, for one example, it could be any number of things, but we'll just use desire for an example. Um, and a desire comes up, you take the time to look into it and break it down, and what you have is a sensation in the body, and you
Mhm.
have
Yep.
the mental activity interpreting it and turning it into whatever.
Yeah.
Um, and so, whether it's something like caffeine, which, I'm trying to do away with, or if it's just something as simple as, um, wanting a piece of candy or wanting to have something to eat or wanting to go lay down, whatever it might be, or, you know, ordering something I don't need online.
Right.
Um, which fortunately, I mean, that's not something that, bedevils me. I mean, I order things, but I don't just,
Yeah.
relentlessly buy stuff I don't need.
Retail
So,
therapy.
yeah. So, the sensation shows up in the body, the mental activity, and I see that the thoughts are, as you put it, thin. It's just a thought. It's like a smoke ring and comes through and disappears. And the thoughts come and go, but yet there's still this move towards it. Okay, so why is this happening? Oh, okay, because there's still a sensation in the body. The sensation in the body not only gives it a great deal of verisimilitude, it continues to, I guess, probably by that very reason, it continues to move the being towards that thing. And frequently, in a case of, there's another competing voice that says, I don't want this. I don't
Mhm.
want this.
Yeah.
Uh, and so, for instance, today I was at the grocery store picking up something for Susanna, and I walked into the store, and immediately some sort of caffeinated something pops into my mind. I don't want that. I'm not interested. And, I see the thought. It's like, okay, it's a thought, and I see the feeling goes with it. And, kind of broke down, fell apart, and went away. And so between the time it took me to do what I needed in there and leave, I happened to go down that aisle. I'm looking up at him, and there's a thought, and there's a feeling in the body. When I see that, and see it for what it is. And I remember what you said. The first thing that has to happen is you have to kind of stop that.
Yeah.
You have to kind of, okay, I'm not going to follow that. And then once you kind of put some distance there, put the brakes on, then it's the sensation of the body and the thoughts.
Yeah.
So put the brakes on, like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to wait for a second. And I see the thoughts, they come and go, and the sensation of the body is more or less gone. And then I mean, of course, I never understand how it happens. We don't really know how decisions get made. But in spite of the fact that the desire seemed to be gone and there wasn't anything at work, all of a sudden I reach up and pull this bugger off the shelf and take it home with me.
That's hilarious.
And I can't, I mean, I really have been spending a lot of time looking
Yeah.
at this and dwelling on it and writing about it and trying to get underneath it. And, there's been moderate success. And I see little things where there are little, I guess I call them micro shifts, where there'll
Yeah.
be this sort of this tiny moment of insight. And so there are times where they come up and I can go, it's just a thought and it's gone. No
Yeah.
big deal. But there are other times, particularly with caffeine, that it has this tenacity. And I don't even see where the tenacity is coming from because, like I said, I saw the thoughts. It's just a thought. It's just a thought. It's
Yeah.
just in the head. There's a little bit of this in the chest, and
Yeah.
it's gone.
Yeah.
Then why the hell am I reaching up to the shelf to grab that thing and leaving the store with it?
Was the thought about just the fact that it existed and it was pulling you towards it, or was there some thought about the
Getting it.
possibility of either the taste of it or the energy of it, or was
A
there
lot of the
something?
first and some of the second.
Yeah. So it is interesting. It's hard to say when we have cases like that where we are aware, but we still do them anyway. What I have found in the past personally is that when that sort of thing happens, there's usually it's like the awareness is there, it's noticing it, but
Hmm.
there's still a feeling of like, fuck it. And then going getting it at the end. But because there's still a pull, there's still a sensation that is not completely resolved, right? And
Right.
there is still that kind of move. So what I would recommend with that is exactly what we did with the itch. If you're in the aisle and you're still looking up at it, and it's like, okay, hold on. Before the hand gets to it, right? Hold on.
Mhm.
Feel into the body, feel that sensation, and do that same absorbing into it so that that sensation of contraction, that pull, that magnetism, that want just starts to diffuse. And you can just be fully integrated with that sensation. And then just see what happens. Maybe you reach up, maybe you don't. But it'll be really interesting to see what actually happens when you do that. And if you do still find yourself reaching up, as much as you can be really mindful of that whole action. Does it feel like your hand is physically reaching up to grab the cans and bring them down? Does it feel like you are, is there like a feeling like when you actually grab the item and take it down, is there then a feeling of satisfaction or anticipation or something in the body? Is there now a good thing that has, good feeling that has replaced the tension feeling or the wanting feeling?
So,
I'm rewarding myself or whatever. Ooh, can't wait to have that. Is something like that taking the place?
so what you're saying is, if after all of these other things, it still winds up happening, to pay extra careful attention to the whole process of
Yeah.
okay,
And
all
the
right.
whole walk from the aisle where you've grabbed it to
Oh,
the cashier, because that is a whole, it's
yeah,
not
you're
a
right.
fait accompli that you're going to actually walk out of that. You could
Yeah.
take it down, put it in the cart, walk and go, nope, turn around and put it back. So there's a lot happening in that procession to the cash register and the whole point where
Right.
you're paying, taking the card out. Is there any back and forth going on? Any sensations in the body? Again, is there like anticipation and excitement about it? Is there some sort of irresolution or, you know, really be curious of that whole process when it happens.
Okay. All right. That's man, that's a whole other level to that I had never thought about, considered, or if you may have even mentioned it before, but I'd forgotten about it. Um, so that's all right. I'm really curious to see what comes of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
There's endless levels of things to investigate on this because it's so they do get so subtle. What was that?
huh?
Oh, I thought you heard something or saw something
Oh
in
no, I watched a very large mosquito go flying by.
oh oh
Like, holy cow, man, that thing's huge.
wow.
So,
Was it a mosquito or one of those
oh, it's a mosquito.
okay, because we have those other ones that look like mosquitoes, but they're giant, but they're not actually mosquitoes and they don't bite you, which is I forget what they're called.
Yeah, I can't think of what they're called either, but no, it wasn't. Fortunately, it wasn't that big. It's
Okay.
not like the South American mosquitoes
Okay.
or the Southeast Asia. I forget where it was. Somebody was telling me about being there and seeing mosquitoes that were as big as small birds.
Jeez.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they weren't kidding. I thought they
Yeah.
were exaggerating. Like, no, I'm telling you, I'm serious, man. They're as big as small birds.
Wow.
Yeah, like,
Yeah.
man, you'd have to really dress for that.
Seriously. Seriously, you need like a transfusion after one mosquito bite.
Yeah, a transfusion, unless you were wearing your lightweight aluminum suit.
Yeah.
Anyway, but yeah, that's that has been, I won't say frustration, it's been more consternation
Yeah.
for, maybe about a month or so now of going through this and m- having, little bits of success here and there, but largely it's more um, getting snared by the thoughts and the sensations. And see if I get my thought back. While I'm looking forward to putting this into play, um, there is still this, I don't know how to describe it, a sense of, well, it's kind of like what I said to you in that email the other day, kind of this sense of trying to move but going nowhere,
Hmm.
you know?
I think you also have to keep in mind, for one thing, um, it's really important to be compassionate and kind and gentle with ourselves and not
Yeah.
expect too much. The other thing is, especially because now you've been under an inordinate amount of stress and pressure and obligation, taking care of everything in the house. We need a certain amount of bandwidth to do this stuff, right? Like there is a reason why people go off to monasteries because it takes away all of that other stuff. You don't have to worry about taking care of your wife when you're in a monastery and people are cooking for you and you're sitting there and all you have to do is meditate and watch what comes and goes. This is absolutely harder in this situation. The good thing is we have lots more opportunities to practice in the real
Yes.
world. The downside is that you're working with less energy than you would have if you were in a perfectly isolated situation. Um,
Yeah.
I mean, I obviously had a lot of insight from taking care of my mom for so long, but my practice really took off after she had passed away, and I had 2 years where I really didn't have to do anything. And it was just like this stuff all the time, for the guiding and doing my own practice and all of that constantly. Because then it was like there really weren't obligations. I had a lot more bandwidth. I could utilize all of the stuff that I had had over the previous almost 20 years of practice. And those things were coming in and, but it really came together and congealed and had the big transformations happen because I had the bandwidth to there weren't any other obligations at that point to really worry about. And so I think that is something, has something going for it that there is a benefit to not having a lot of other stuff on your plate at this point. And because there is other stuff on your plate, it's also important to be kind and compassionate to yourself and not expect that there's something wrong with me because I'm, not getting it as fast as I think I should be getting it. But that recognize like we're biological creatures. There is only so much energy in here to go around. And when you've got nine dogs and, a wife and kid who need your attention and care, there is only so much to be put into watching for craving and aversion and things like that. And especially because we use that craving usually to distract ourselves from all of the discomfort of being of service and of being drained and not having enough energy. That is like our default to either getting the, source of energy that we need. Like I'm feeling really exhausted. Ooh, I'm craving berries. Let me go forage and get some berries. Like it's in our nature to like, I need carbohydrates. Let me get something. That's built into us biologically. And then we also use that on our more, modern side of things, like, oh, I can just also deflect by grabbing my phone and scrolling or getting a soda or whatever. And I get these kind of extra boosts that I wouldn't have had otherwise. But it's just a way of balancing because I feel like I'm in deficit in some way. And so the mind is like, oh, well, this
Hmm.
will help. Here you go. So it's also helpful to be kind about our expectations with these things.
Yeah, you said something in there that was really helpful. I hadn't considered before, but um, I can't remember what it was. But at any rate, there was something connected to that. But I could be wrong. I don't think I'm hard on myself. I don't think I berate myself or criticize myself or judge myself for not getting it. It's more a sense of wanting to get it, wanting to um, wanting to get the benefit of having seen through that so that I'm not having to be led around by the nose by my desires.
Yeah, I get it.
Um,
But look even at that desire. And I know within
uh,
within Buddhism, it's usually considered like the one good desire is the desire to,
yep,
wake up.
I
But but
recall.
but even use that, that's still interesting. That what is that desire coming from? Who is the one that that desire is pointing to as they are now going to be free from being led around by their nose?
Well, I mean, that's a question that needs to be answered in a lot of different contexts, so I understand that. But in the case of caffeine specifically, it's that frequently, probably even more often than not, the effect it has on me is one of just doesn't feel very good. It can, be pretty unpleasant to downright uncomfortable,
Yeah.
and would like to quit. That part of the mind, that part of this organism that goes for that. I would like to have something that can successfully counter that so I don't have to continue to keep putting the body and the mind through that experience.
Yeah, I get that.
The other day it was totally inadvertent. I didn't mean to make this coffee that strong, but I made the coffee too strong. And for about 4 hours, man, I was just kind of hanging on, like just it'll pass, it'll pass.
It's brutal. It's brutal. Yeah, it's
Yeah, it really was. It was pretty damn uncomfortable. So, God, why do you keep doing this to yourself? Well, I don't know.
yeah.
Find whoever it is that's doing it and see if we can get an answer from them. You're not going to find them though.
Well, that's it. But in the process, I mean, obviously, if you accidentally over spike the coffee, that's one thing. But like in the process of that, these are all just those moments that lead up to, are you feeling particularly exhausted right now? Does it feel like you are in need of that extra bonus or treat for yourself that I'm not being fulfilled in any other way. The one thing that kind of feels like it's solving that is to have coffee. Whatever it is, it might be just a meager thing, and it might not be, again, that overt and explicitly stated, but,
I
but,
got
huh?
scared the heck out of me.
I noticed. But what is it about, in that moment, you just check in and go, okay, what am I feeling that the coffee seems like a suitable, um, it's not really a substitute, but that it feels like it's what I guess maybe ask, what is this coffee promising to do for me?
Okay.
And get that kind of Okay. Ask into it. Oh, yeah, okay. I feel in the body. I feel really sluggish and kind of unclear right now. Okay, so there's an idea that the coffee is going to perk me up and I'm going to be a little more alive and awake. And okay, just be aware of that, And then if it's something else, if it's like, you just have that feeling of just being undervalued, and then you recognize, oh, okay, well, maybe this is my way of supposedly valuing myself. It might not be the most well adapted way of doing it. There might be some ramifications to it, but notice that might still be the underlying motivation. It might be something else. Just be curious about what the motivation might be.
Okay. Hang on a minute. I know that all of this is in the video,
Yep.
um, but this saves me the trouble of having to. It's one thing to sit down and listen to it in chunks and go through it, and then it's another thing when there's something in there that you want specifically, and you have to go through the entire thing to get to those two or three little things. So save me the trouble of having to try to figure out where in the heck they're at.
I completely get that. Yeah.
Well, we've been on for what is it, close to 3 hours now?
It actually is. Holy crap. Yeah.
Yeah.
Going
And
fast.
Susanna needs me, so I'm as much as if it were left to me, I would sit here and discuss this until you told me you had something else you had to do.
Appreciate
I
that.
I know that she's waiting on me, so
Yeah. This has been good though. Thank
it
you.
has been it has been fantastic, and it made me realize how much I missed it. I
I'm
mean, I knew
sorry it's been
it
so long.
anyway,
Good
so
luck with everything.
thank
I
you.
wish Susanna well, and I hope she's feeling better. And uh, yeah, I know it's a lot, but keep up the amazing work because everything you're doing while you're doing all of that is really remarkable.
Well, as difficult as things can be sometimes, it's been one of the best opportunities for practice I think I've ever had because
Absolutely.
my situation has kind of been the opposite of yours. I had a lot of, even though there was a lot to do, relatively speaking, I had a lot of time to myself. I could meditate, for a few hours a day, and I could leave and go on a retreat for a week or so, that kind of thing, which it's not really possible now.
Yeah.
And that was a good foundation that set up a lot of things, but things didn't really take off until you and I started working together. And the more that things ramp up here in our house, in our lives, it seems like the more it really kind of demands. It's not really quite the right word, but it sort of it challenges me to, okay, are you going to meet the moment, or are you just going to sleepwalk through it?
Yeah. Yeah. Love that. Love it. I love that you're making the most of it. So
If we're going to go through this, I might as well make it as beneficial as I can to
absolutely.
myself and everyone else. Because I mean, Tuesday doesn't have the slightest clue that she benefited because, I didn't have to kill her boyfriend.
Right. So there we go. Win, win, win. Oh man.
Uh,
Thank you so much, man. I
yeah,
wish
well,
you
thank you.
well.
All
We'll
right.
talk to you soon.
All right. Talk to you then.
Bye.